even though you can't prove we're not in a simulation, because the simulation could be so good, like the Matrix was pretty convincing at first, right? But the simulation could be so good that you can't necessarily tell. But at the same time, you can design experiments which might indicate to you that there's something going on like this video game rendering idea. And there are folks out there, trying to run experiments to try to show that this is really what's happening with quantum mechanics, is that like a video game, this whole world is being rendered for us. Information being rendered just like a video game.
And the effect that consciousness has on this world. So consciousness is the thing that we're using to measure, or the thing that we're using to interact with whatever possibilities exist.
Right. And so that in the RPG version, right, this is why I like to make the distinction between the RPG version and the NPC version. So in the RPG version, we are plugged in, right, like Neo in the back of the head, or with a virtual reality headset, or some technology yet to be developed, right? And so when you play a video game, right, it's not enough that the pixels are there. I mean, you basically are watching that game, right, as the player. And when you're not watching, what happens? You just turn it off, right? You turn off your computer. What happens? Well, there's still the information going on the server. Maybe other people are playing, right? But it doesn't need to render it at that point. It's just the server can keep track of where everything is. It's what we did when we created video games. We would, send down information. And in fact, you can then turn around and do something very interesting. Like if you're a level 30 player, right, and I'm a level 2 player, our avatars could be standing right next to each other. One could see the dragon, and one might not be able to see the dragon because maybe we don't have that ability in the game. We're not at a high enough level. But the server logic is deciding that. So consciousness then becomes the player in that model of simulation theory, and it renders the world for us. And it turns out that is very similar to what the world's religions have been telling us, right? Not just one or two of the world's religions. Like when I wrote my book, The Simulation Hypothesis, I gave it a subtitle of why AI, quantum physics, and Eastern mystics agree we're in a video game. And I was thinking primarily of the Eastern mystics, like, in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions and the yogis. And they talk about the term Maya. Most people have probably heard that term, and karma and all these different terms. But Maya means illusion, right? That's how it gets translated. It's like an ancient Sanskrit word. And so these mystics are telling us that the world isn't really real. It's a kind of illusion. But if you really look at the definition of that word Maya, it means something more like a carefully crafted illusion, right? It's almost like if you go to a magic show and you know the guy's not really sawing that woman in half, okay? But you kind of agree to suspend your disbelief because that's what makes the whole thing fun, right? Watching a magic show or watching special effects, Blade Runner 2049, the car's not really flying. Those are just CGI, right? But we agree to that to a certain extent as we go into that world and we become immersed in that world. And so what, the mystics in the Eastern traditions have been telling us is that we agree to basically go into this illusory world in order to have these experiences, right? Sometimes people say, well, what's the purpose of the simulation? And I say, well, why do you play video games? And why do you play video games?
Fun.
Fun is one. Two is to try to have experiences that you probably can't have outside of the game. Like even Grand Theft Auto, right? You're not going to go out there and do all that crazy stuff in the real world. Well, some people might, but right, most people wouldn't. And you're not going to, I can't fly on a dragon and kill orcs as much as I might want
Especially with no real world consequences.
Right, with no real world, exactly. So that's one of the reasons why, but there are consequences within the game, right? And for the characters in the game, right? For the NPCs that you're killing, right? Those are all real consequences within the game. But when you look at it from outside the game, and so like the Eastern mystics have been telling us this, and turns out in the Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions, right, the Abrahamic religions, they've also been telling us this, that the world is Maya, and they use metaphors back then. Right? So, all these religions came about a couple thousand years ago, and so they had to use metaphors that were understood by the people back then, right? And so they used whatever the metaphor of the dream was a key metaphor, that the world is like a dream, or that the soul puts on the body like a set of clothes, and that when you die, you take off these clothes, and then you're back to the soul, whatever that happens to be. They don't really define what that is. In fact, they use the exact same metaphor, like in the Bhagavad Gita. They use this clothing metaphor, and then Rumi, who's become popular in the West and was an Islamic Sufi, a poet, but also a mystic. He used the exact same phrase, right? He said, "You put on the body, you put like a series of clothes," and so they use that metaphor to try to describe something, which is the second part of the idea of the simulation hypothesis. The first idea was the world is information that gets rendered, and the second part is the world is some kind of a hoax that we are a part of for whatever reason. And so in the traditions, over time, they've tried to update these metaphors. And they've tried to use new technology to describe the metaphors, because that's how we can, as modern people, we can understand it.